The red carpet unfurled like a river of blood, pulsing with the screams of fans and the relentless flash of cameras. Ethan Caldwell, Hollywood's golden boy, stood at its center, his smile a practiced masterpiece. But his eyes flickered with something raw, something no one else saw. I did. Because I was always watching. Always there. Just out of frame, his assistant. His shadow. His secret. My name is Lucas Harper, and I'm the guy who keeps Ethan's world from collapsing. At 27, I've spent 3 years memorizing his coffee order, black. No sugar. Scalding hot. His schedule, 18-hour days. No breaks. And the way his jaw tightens when the pressure gets too much. I'm invisible to the world that worships him. But to Ethan, I'm the one who knows him best, or so I thought. It started on a Tuesday. The kind of day that feels like it's holding its breath. We were in Los Angeles, prepping for the premiere of Eclipse of Valor, Ethan's latest blockbuster. The studio lot buzzed with chaos, directors barking orders, makeup artists wielding brushes like weapons, and me, dodging paparazzi to get Ethan to his next interview. He was late again because he'd insisted on rewriting a scene at 3 a.m. I found him in his trailer, sprawled on a leather couch, script pages scattered like fallen leaves. Lucas, you ever think about just walking away? His voice was low, almost lost in the hum of the air conditioning. He didn't look at me, just stared at the ceiling, one hand tracing the edge of a whiskey glass he hadn't touched. I froze, my clipboard suddenly heavy. From you. Or from this circus? I tried to keep it light, but my heart was already racing. Ethan's questions were never casual. He sat up, his blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the air feel thin. Both. Either. I don't know. He ran a hand through his dark hair. And for a moment, he wasn't the untouchable star. He was just Ethan, the guy who'd once confessed he hated his own laugh. I wanted to say something real, something that would bridge the gap between us. But the trailer door swung open, and the moment shattered. A publicist stormed in, rattling off demands about photo ops and sound bites. Ethan's mask slid back into place, and I was just the assistant again, scribbling notes, blending into the background. But that question lingered, a spark in a room full of gasoline. Ethan was Hollywood's darling, a 29-year-old heartthrob with a smile that sold millions of tickets. He was also deeply, painfully closeted, a secret I'd pieced together over late-night conversations and stolen glances. I'd never pushed, never asked, because I knew the cost of being out in this industry. And me, I was out, quietly, to a handful of friends. But my feelings for Ethan were a locked box I didn't dare open. That night, after the premiere, we ended up at a rooftop after-party in West Hollywood. The city glittered below, a constellation of ambition and broken dreams. Ethan was surrounded, as always, by producers, co-stars, and fans who hung on his every word. I stood by the bar, nursing a soda, watching him charm the room while his shoulders stayed tense. Then he broke away, weaving through the crowd until he was beside me, closer than he needed to be. You didn't answer my question, he said, his voice barely audible over the music. His breath smelled faintly of mint, not whiskey, and I realized he'd been sober all night. I don't walk away from things I care about, I said, my throat tight. It was the closest I'd ever come to admitting how much he meant. How much I wanted to be more than the guy with the clipboard. His eyes softened, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might say something that would change everything. But then a co-star called his name, and he was pulled back into the spotlight, leaving me with the weight of words unsaid. The next morning, Ethan was quieter than usual, his usual charisma dimmed. We were in his sleek, minimalist apartment in the hills, going over his schedule for the week. He sat on the edge of his couch, staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over a text he didn't send. I pretended not to notice, but my chest ached. I knew that Luke was spiraling, trapped in a life that felt like a cage despite its glamour. "Lucas," he said suddenly, setting the phone down. "What if I told you I'm tired of pretending?" I stopped, mid-sentence, my pen frozen over my notepad. "Pretending what?" I asked, though I knew. God, I knew. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and crossed the room, stopping inches from me. His hand brushed mine, deliberate this time, and my breath caught. "You know what?" he whispered, and the world tilted. I wanted to close the distance, to pull him in and tell him he didn't have to hide anymore. But the weight of his career, his image, his entire life pressed down on us. I was just his assistant, and he was a star. Our hearts might have been screaming, but Hollywood had its own script, and we weren't the ones writing it. The air in Ethan's apartment felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. His hand lingered near mine, his fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm he was trying to project. I wanted to say anything to keep him from retreating, but the phone on the coffee table buzzed, shattering the silence. It was his agent, Marissa, her name flashing like a warning sign. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he stepped back, the moment slipping away like sand. "I should take this," he muttered, grabbing the phone and turning toward the window. I stood there, my heart pounding, trying to pretend I wasn't unraveling. Marissa's voice was sharp even through the phone, rattling off details about a new projected gritty drama that could redefine Ethan's career. I caught fragments, Oscar bait, method acting, no distractions. Ethan nodded along, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the LA skyline. When he hung up, he didn't turn around. "She wants me to meet with the director tomorrow," he said, his voice flat. "Some guy who thinks I'm too pretty for the role. Says I need to rough it up, show some grit." "You've got grit," I said, stepping closer. "You've got more than they'll ever see." It came out fiercer than I meant, and he finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You think so?" he asked, and there was something fragile in his voice, something that made me want to protect him from the world that was always watching. I nodded, my throat tight. "I know you, Ethan. You're not just the guy on the posters." For a moment, he looked like he might say something real, but then he shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You're too good at this, Lucas. Keeping me grounded. Keeping me sane." I wanted to tell him it wasn't just my job, that it was never just my job, but the word stuck. Instead, I handed him his revised schedule, my fingers brushing his again. This time, he didn't pull away. The next few days were a blur of meetings, fittings, and rehearsals. Ethan threw himself into the new project, spending hours with the director, a chain-smoking auteur named Victor who treated everyone like props. I watched Ethan transform, slipping into the skin of a broken, angry character. But I also saw the toll it took. Late at night, when the set was quiet, he'd text me random things, like a meme or a line from the script. But I knew it was his way of reaching out. One night, after a 14-hour shoot, we ended up at a diner off Sunset Boulevard. It was one of those places that hadn't changed since the 80s, with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like regret. Ethan slouched in the corner, his hoodie pulled up to hide his face, but I could still see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Why do you stay?" he asked suddenly, stirring sugar into his coffee he wouldn't drink. "This job, it's hell. I'm hell. You could do anything. Lucas, why me?" I leaned back, my heart racing. "Because you're worth it," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Because someone has to remind you who you are when the cameras aren't rolling. He stared at me, his spoon frozen mid-stir. For a second, I thought he might laugh it off. But instead, he reached across the table, his hand covering mine. It was quick, barely a second, but it felt like a lifetime. "You're too good for this world," he said softly, and I knew he meant it. The diner's neon sign buzzed above us, and I wanted to freeze that moment, to live in it forever. But the world didn't stop for us. The next morning, Victor called Ethan in for a private meeting, and I wasn't invited. When Ethan came out, his face was pale, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He didn't say much, just asked me to drive him home. In the car, the silence was heavy. I glanced at him, his profile sharp against the city lights. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at me. "Victor knows," he said, his voice hollow. "About me. About who I am." My stomach dropped. "Knows what?" I asked, though I already knew. The industry was a shark tank, and secrets like Ethan's were blood in the water. He didn't say it outright. Ethan continued, his fingers digging into his thighs. But he hinted. Said I need to keep my personal life clean if I want this role. Said the studio won't back a risk. I gripped the steering wheel, anger burning in my chest. "He's blackmailing you." Ethan laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "It's not blackmail if it's just the truth. This tone it chews up people like me." I pulled over, unable to focus on the road. "You don't have to let it," I said, turning to face him. "You're Ethan Caldwell. You're bigger than this." He looked at me then, his eyes raw with fear and something else, something that looked like hope. "And what if I'm not?" he whispered. "What if I'm just me?" "Then that's enough," I said, my voice shaking. "It's always been enough." For a moment, we just sat there, the city humming around us. Then he reached for my hand, his grip tight, like he was holding on for dear life. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Not when every part of me was screaming to hold him closer, to tell him he wasn't alone. But Hollywood was always watching, and we were running out of places to hide. The car felt like a sanctuary, a stolen moment where the world couldn't touch us. Ethan's hand was warm in mine, his thumb tracing slow circles that sent shivers up my spine. But the weight of Victor's words hung over us, a storm cloud ready to burst. We didn't speak as I drove him back to his apartment. The city lights blurred past, a kaleidoscope of dreams and danger. When we reached his building, Ethan didn't let go of my hand until we were inside, the door clicking shut behind us like a promise. "Lucas," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know how to do this." He paced the living room, his shadow stretching across the hardwood floor. "I've spent my whole life playing parts, hiding who I am. And now it's like the mask is cracking, and I'm terrified of what's underneath." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "You don't have to hide from me," I said. "Never from me." He stopped pacing, his eyes searching mine. There was a vulnerability there I'd never seen, not in 3 years of late-night talks and quiet moments. "You don't get it," he said, his voice breaking. "If I come out, it's not just my career. It's my family, my friends, everything. They'll tear me apart." I wanted to argue, to tell him the world was changing, but I knew better. Hollywood was a machine, and it didn't forgive deviations from the script. Still, I couldn't let him drown in that fear. "Then we fight," I said, stepping closer. "Together. You're not alone, Ethan." He looked at me like I was the only thing keeping him afloat. Then, slowly, He closed the distance between us, his hand cupping my cheek. My breath hitched, and for a moment, the world was just us two hearts beating in defiance of the rules. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, then desperate, like he was pouring years of silence into that kiss. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair. And for those few seconds, Hollywood didn't exist. It was just Ethan and me, rewriting the script in a language only we understood. But the world always finds a way to intrude. His phone buzzed again, Marissa's name lighting up the screen. He pulled back, his forehead resting against mine, his breath ragged. I can't ignore this, he whispered. I know, I said, my voice barely steady. But you don't have to face it alone. He nodded, but the fear was back in his eyes. We spent the rest of the night talking. Not about the kiss, but about everything else: his childhood in Ohio, my years scraping by in LA, the dreams we'd both buried under the weight of reality. By dawn, we were curled up on his couch, my head on his shoulder, the city waking up outside. The next day, Ethan was back on set, slipping into his role like nothing had happened. But I saw the cracks: how his smile faltered when Victor barked orders, how his hands shook when he thought no one was watching. I stayed close, managing his schedule, deflecting paparazzi. But my mind was on that kiss, on the promise we hadn't spoken aloud. Then came the article. It was a gossip blog, one of those vulture sites that thrived on half-truths. Ethan Caldwell's secret late-night rendezvous. The headline screamed, with a blurry photo of us leaving the diner. It didn't name me, but the implications were clear. My stomach churned as I read it, the words twisting like a knife. Ethan saw it before I could warn him. He was in his trailer, his phone clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. They're circling, he said, his voice hollow. They always do. It's just rumors, I said, trying to sound calm. We can handle this. He laughed, a sound that cut through me. Handle it. Lucas, this is how it starts. A whisper, a photo, and then they dig until there's nothing left. I knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet my eyes. Let them dig. They won't find anything unless you give them power over you. He stared at me, and for a moment, I thought he might believe me. But then Victor burst in, his face red with fury. What the hell is this? He snapped, holding up his phone with the same article. You think you can play games with my film? Ethan stood, his mask slipping back into place. It's nothing, he said, his voice cold. Just tabloid trash. Victor's eyes narrowed, flicking to me. And you, he said, pointing. You're supposed to keep him in line, not drag him into the gutter. I bristled, but Ethan stepped between us. Leave him out of this, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This is my mess. Victor scoffed, but backed off, muttering about damage control. When he was gone, Ethan turned to me, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to pull you into this. You didn't, I said, my voice fierce. I'm here because I want to be. He didn't respond, but his hand found mine, squeezing briefly before letting go. We didn't talk about the article again, but it hung over us, a reminder that our world was built on fragile lies. That night, Ethan insisted on going to a club, some exclusive spot in downtown LA. I went along, partly to keep an eye on him, partly because I couldn't stay away. The music was deafening, the crowd a blur of wealth and desperation. Ethan danced with a model, a publicity stunt Marissa had arranged, but his eyes kept finding mine across the room. When he finally broke away, he pulled me into a dark corner, his breath hot against my ear. I don't want to be their puppet anymore, he said, but I don't know how to stop. Then we figure it out. I whispered back. Together. He kissed me again, quick and reckless. And for a moment, I believed we could rewrite the ending. But Hollywood doesn't let go that easily. The club's pulsing lights felt like a heartbeat, each throb a reminder of the risk we were taking. Ethan's kiss lingered on my lips, a secret we couldn't keep much longer. As we slipped out the back door, the cool LA night hit us like a slap, grounding us in the reality we'd been dodging. We didn't talk as I drove him home, the silence thick with unspoken questions. His hand rested on the console between us, close enough to touch, but not crossing that line. When we reached his apartment, he invited me in, his voice quiet but steady. "Stay?" he said. "Just stay?" Inside, we sat on his balcony, the city sprawling below like a map of our fears. He lit a cigarette, a habit he'd picked up during stressful shoots, and exhaled a cloud that curled into the night. "I've been running from this my whole life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From who I am. From what I want." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "And what do you want, Ethan?" He looked at me, his eyes raw and unguarded. "You," he said simply, and my heart stopped. But it's not that simple, is it? Not when the whole world's watching. I wanted to tell him it could be simple, that we could find a way, but the weight of his words held me back. Instead, I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. "We'll figure it out," I said, echoing my earlier promise. "One step at a time." He squeezed my hand, but his smile was tinged with doubt. "You make it sound so easy, Lucas." "It's not," I admitted. "But it's worth it." The next morning, the gossip blog had exploded into mainstream news. Ethan Caldwell's mystery man. The headline screamed, with more blurry photosis at the diner, leaving the club, even one from the premiere where I'd been too close to his side. Marissa called before we'd even had coffee, her voice a mix of panic and fury. "You need to get ahead of this," she snapped. "Deny it. Spin it. Do something." Ethan listened in silence, his face a mask of resignation. When he hung up, he turned to me. "They want me to do a press conference. Say it's all a misunderstanding. Maybe date someone female for the cameras." My stomach twisted. "And what do you want to do?" He laughed, a hollow sound. "I want to tell them all to go to hell. But I can't. Not yet." The press conference was scheduled for that afternoon, a rushed attempt at damage control. I stood in the wings, watching as Ethan stepped up to the podium, his smile as polished as ever. The reporters fired questions like bullets, each one laced with insinuation. He handled them with grace, denying the rumors without denying himself. But I saw the strain in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the podium. Afterward, he found me backstage, his face pale. "I hate this," he whispered. "I hate lying." "Then don't," I said, my voice fierce. "You don't owe them your truth, but you owe it to yourself." He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he might agree. But then Marissa appeared, dragging him to a meeting with the studio execs. I was left alone, my heart a tangle of hope and frustration. That night, Ethan showed up at my tiny apartment in Silver Lake, a place he'd never been. He looked out of place in my cramped living room, his designer jacket clashing with my thrift store couch. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice raw. "I needed to see you." I pulled him inside, my hand shaking. "You're here now?" I said. "That's what matters." We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, his fear of losing his career, my fear of losing him. When he kissed me again, it was slower, deeper, like he was memorizing me. We fell asleep on my couch, tangled together, the world outside forgotten. But the world didn't forget us. The next morning, my phone was flooded with notifications, more articles, more photos, and a leaked email from Victor to the studio, calling Ethan a liability. The internet was a wildfire, and we were at its center. Ethan was quiet as he read the headlines, his face unreadable. "They're not going to stop," he said finally. "Not until they destroy me." "Then we fight back," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. "We tell the truth. Your truth." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "And what if I lose everything?" "You won't," I said, taking his hand. "Because you'll have me." For the first time, he smiled a real smile, not the one he wore for the cameras. "You're too good for me, Lucas," he said, but he didn't let go. We spent the day planning, drafting a statement that would let Ethan come out on his own terms. It was risky, maybe reckless, but it felt right. We contacted a journalist we trusted, someone who'd written about LGBTQ plus issues with compassion. By evening, the statement was ready, a single page that held Ethan's heart. But before we could send it, Marissa called again. "The studio's pulling funding," she said, her voice shaking. "They're saying you're too controversial. Victor's pushing for a recast." Ethan's face went white, but his voice was steady. "Let them," he said. "I'm done hiding." I stared at him, pride and fear warring in my chest. He was choosing himself, choosing us, but the cost was already piling up. As we sat there, the city humming outside, I knew we were standing on the edge of something irreversible. The statement sat on Ethan's laptop, a single paragraph that could unravel his career or set him free. We read it over and over, tweaking words, weighing each syllable like it was a grenade. Ethan's hand trembled as he hovered over the send button, his eyes locked on the screen. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "No going back." I squeezed his shoulder, my heart in my throat. "You're doing the right thing," I said. "For you. For us." He nodded, but the fear in his eyes was a living thing. Then, with a sharp inhale, he clicked send. The email whooshed away, carrying his truth to a journalist named Sarah who'd promised to handle it with care. We sat in silence, the weight of what we'd done settling over us like dust. The story broke the next morning. Ethan Caldwell comes out, a Hollywood star's brave truth. The headline read, accompanied by a photo of Ethan from the premiere, his smile softer than the one he usually wore. Sarah had done her job well, framing his story with humanity, not scandal. But the internet was a beast, and not everyone was kind. By noon, Ethan's phone was a war-zone text from friends, voicemails from his parents, and a flood of social media notifications ranging from love to hate. I watched him scroll through them, his face a mask of calm that didn't reach his eyes. "They're calling me brave," he said, his voice flat. "And a sellout, and a hero, and a disgrace." I took the phone from his hands, setting it face down. "You don't have to read it all," I said. "Not today." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "What if I made a mistake? Lucas, what if this ruins everything?" I pulled him into my arms, holding him tight. "You didn't make a mistake," I said fiercely. "You chose yourself. That's never a mistake." He buried his face in my shoulder, and for a moment, we were just two people, not a star and his assistant. But the world didn't let us stay there. Marissa called, her voice a mix of panic and resignation. "The studio's officially dropped you," she said. "Victor's moving forward with a new lead. But There's something else. Ethan stiffened, pulling away from me. What? A few producers are reaching out, she said. Smaller studios. Indie projects. They want to work with you because of this. They're calling it a bold move. Ethan blinked. Processing. Indie projects, he said, almost laughing. I haven't done indie since film school. Maybe it's a chance, I said, my voice soft. A chance to tell the stories you want. He looked at me, something like hope flickering in his eyes. But before he could respond, his phone rang again. His mother. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering, then handed it to me. I can't, he whispered. Not yet. I nodded, setting the phone aside. We spent the day fielding calls, dodging reporters camped outside his building, and trying to make sense of the chaos. By evening, we were exhausted, curled up on his couch with takeout we barely touched. I didn't expect it to feel like this, Ethan said, staring at the ceiling. Free, but terrifying. I took his hand, my thumb brushing his knuckles. Freedom's messy, I said, but it's yours now. He smiled, a small, real smile, and leaned his head against mine. For the first time in days, we felt like we could breathe. The next morning, Sarah called with an update. The article had gone viral, but not just for the reasons we'd feared. Fans were rallying, sharing stories of their own struggles, using hashtags like #EthanCaldwellTruth. A few celebrities tweeted support, and an indie director named Lena offered Ethan a lead role in a queer coming-of-age film. It's not a blockbuster, Lena said over a video call, her voice warm but direct. But it's honest, and I think you're ready for honest. Ethan glanced at me, his eyes searching. I nodded, a silent promise that I'd be there, no matter what. I'm in, he said, his voice steady for the first time in days. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan met with Lena, diving into a script that felt like it was written for him. I was there for every meeting, not just as his assistant, but as his partner, a role we were still learning to navigate. We stole moments between chaos-quiet dinners, late-night walks, kisses that felt like defiance. But the past wasn't done with us. Victor leaked more emails, painting Ethan as unstable and difficult. The studio doubled down, spinning a narrative that Ethan had abandoned the project. The headline stung, but Ethan refused to engage. Let them talk, he said one night, his voice firm. I'm done playing their game. I admired his strength, but I saw the toll it took. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, he'd stare at his phone, reading the hate, letting it cut deeper than he'd admit. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from the world, but all I could do was hold him tighter. One evening, we went to a small LGBTQ+ community event, a fundraiser for youth shelters. Ethan was nervous, his first public appearance since coming out. But when he spoke, his voice was clear, his words raw and honest. The crowd cheered, and for the first time, I saw him stand tall in his truth. As we left, a young fan approached, tears in their eyes. Thank you, they said. You made me feel like I could be myself. Ethan hugged them, his own eyes wet. On the drive home, he was quiet, but his hand stayed in mine. That's why I did it, he said finally. For them. For me. I squeezed his hand, my heart full. And for us, I said. He smiled. And for the first time, I believed we might make it. The fundraiser had changed something in Ethan. He carried himself differently, like a man who'd found his footing after years of running. But Hollywood wasn't done testing him, and the fallout from his coming out was far from over. Lena's film, Shades of Us, was a low-budget project, but it was alive with heart. Ethan threw himself into it, spending days on a small set in East LA, surrounded by a crew who treated him like a person, not a commodity. I was there too, juggling his schedule, but also learning to be more his partner, his anchor, the one who saw him when the cameras stopped rolling. One afternoon, during a break, we sat on the steps of an old theater used as a set. Ethan was in costume, his character's worn jacket hanging loose on his frame. He looked at me, his eyes soft. "This feels right," he said, like I'm finally telling my own story. I smiled, my heart swelling. "You are, and it's a damn good one." He laughed, a sound I'd grown to love, and leaned his shoulder against mine. For a moment, we were just two guys in love, not a star and his assistant. But the moment was fleeting. My phone buzzed with an email from Marissa, forwarding a message from Ethan's parents. They wanted to meet. Tomorrow. Ethan's face clouded when I told him. "They haven't called since the article," he said, his voice tight. "What do they want now?" "Maybe they just want to understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Ethan's parents were old school, religious, the kind who'd always seen his fame as a blessing but never really saw him. The meeting was set for a quiet cafe in Pasadena, away from the paparazzi's reach. Ethan insisted I come, his hand gripping mine under the table as his parents walked in. His mother, Ellen, was all sharp edges and nervous smiles. His father, Tom, was stoic, his eyes fixed on the table. "We're worried about you," Ellen started, her voice trembling. "This choice you've made, it's not what we raised you to be." Ethan's grip tightened, but his voice was steady. "It's not a choice, Mom. It's who I am." Tom finally looked up, his face hard. "You're throwing away everything we worked for. Your career, your future. My future's mine to decide." Ethan cut in, his voice rising. "And I'm done hiding." The table fell silent. I could feel the weight of their judgment, but I also saw Ethan's resolve. He wasn't the scared kid they remembered. He was a man claiming his truth. Ellen's eyes filled with tears. "We just want you to be safe," she whispered. "The world, it's not kind to people like you." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "He's not alone," I said, my voice firm. "He's got people who love him, who see him for who he is." Ethan looked at me, gratitude and something deeper in his eyes. His parents didn't respond, but Ellen reached for his hand, a small gesture that felt like a crack in the wall between them. They left without promising anything, but Ethan was lighter, like he'd shed a weight he'd carried too long. On the drive back, he turned to me. "Thank you," he said, "for being there, for being you." I smiled, my heart full. Always. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of hope and chaos. Shades of us wrapped principal photography. An early buzz was positive. Ethan was electric on screen, his performance raw and real. But the studio's smear campaign continued, with Victor feeding stories to the press about Ethan's unreliability. It hurt, but Ethan refused to let it define him. One night, we attended a screening of the film's rough cut. The small theater was packed with the crew, a few critics, and some of Ethan's old friends who'd stuck by him. As the lights dimmed, Ethan's hand found mine, his fingers trembling. "What if it's not enough?" he whispered. "It's more than enough," I said, squeezing his hand. "It's you." The film was a revelation. Ethan's character, a young man grappling with his identity in a small town, felt like a mirror to his own life. When the credits rolled, the room erupted in applause. Ethan stood, tears in his eyes, and pulled me into a hug. "We did this," he whispered. "Together." But the high didn't last. The next morning, a major outlet published a hit piece, dredging up old rumors and twisting Ethan's coming out into a publicity stunt. The comments were brutal, and I saw the doubt creep back into Ethan's eyes. "We need to respond," I said, pacing his apartment. "Show them you're not backing down." He shook his head, his voice tired. "I'm done fighting their battles. Lucas, I just want to live." "Then live," I said, stopping in front of him. "With me." Out loud. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." We spent the day crafting a social media post, not a defense, but a celebration. Ethan shared a photo of us, his arm around me, the city behind us. The caption was simple: "This is my truth. This is my home." He hit post, and we held our breath. The response was overwhelming. Fans flooded the comments with love, sharing their own stories. A few trolls spewed hate, but they were drowned out by the support. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. As we lay in bed that night, his head on my chest, he whispered, "I think I'm finally free." I kissed his forehead, my heart full. "You are," I said, "and I'm right here." The post changed everything. Ethan's truth was out there, raw and unfiltered, and the world was listening. But freedom came with a price, and we were about to learn how steep it could be. The next morning, we woke to a flood of messages, support from fans, offers from indie filmmakers, and a few cryptic emails from industry insiders warning Ethan to watch his back. Marissa called, her voice a mix of exasperation and admiration. "You've got balls, Caldwell," she said. "But the big studios are circling. They don't like being challenged." Ethan shrugged, his smile defiant. "Let them come. I'm done playing their game." I admired his courage, but I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. Hollywood didn't just let go of its stars, especially not ones who defied the script. We spent the day fielding calls, planning Ethan's next moves. Lena wanted him for another project, a documentary about queer representation in film. It was small, but it was meaningful, and Ethan was all in. That afternoon, we took a rare break, walking through Griffith Park, the city sprawling below us. Ethan's hand was warm in mine, his steps lighter than I'd ever seen. "I used to come here as a kid," he said, nodding toward the observatory in the distance. "Dreamed of being a star. Never thought it'd come with so many strings." I squeezed his hand. "You're cutting those strings, Ethan, one by one." He smiled, pulling me close. "With you," he said. "Always with you." But the strings weren't so easily cut. That evening, we got a call from Sarah, the journalist who'd broken Ethan's story. "I've got a tip," she said, her voice tense. "Victor's shopping a tell-all to a major outlet. Says he's got proof you sabotaged the film." Ethan's face hardened. "Proof? He's got nothing but lies." Sarah hesitated. "He's got emails, Ethan, and a source close to you." My stomach dropped. "A source?" I asked, my voice tight. "Someone on the crew," Sarah said. "They're claiming you were distracted. Unprofessional. That Lucas was a bad influence." Ethan's eyes flashed with anger. "They're targeting you now," he said, turning to me. "Because of me." I shook my head. My jaw clenched. "They can try. I'm not going anywhere." We spent the night digging through emails, trying to figure out who'd turned on us. Ethan was furious, but I saw the fear beneath it, fear of losing everything he'd fought for. I pulled him close, my voice steady. "We'll fight this. I said. Together. The next day, we met with Lena and a lawyer she recommended, a sharp woman named Rachel who specialized in defamation cases. She read through Victor's leaked emails. Her face grim. He's building a narrative, she said. But it's flimsy. We can counter it with the truth, your work on Shades of Us. Your fans' support. Your story. Ethan nodded, but his hands were shaking. What about Lucas? He asked. They're dragging him into this. Rachel looked at me, her eyes kind but firm. You're a target because you're close to him. But you're also his strength. Stay visible. Stay honest. And they'll have nothing to hold on to. We left the meeting with a planned countersue for defamation. Release a statement reaffirming Ethan's commitment to his work. But the real fight was in the court of public opinion. Ethan's fans were loyal, but the industry was ruthless. And Victor had allies. That night, we went to a small bar in West Hollywood, a place where Ethan could blend in. We sat in a corner booth, his hand resting on my knee under the table. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice low. Not just for me. For you. I leaned closer, my forehead touching his. I'm not afraid, I said, though my heart was racing. I chose you. Ethan. All of you. He kissed me, soft and slow. And for a moment, the world faded away. But the world always came back. My phone buzzed with a new headline. Ethan Caldwell's assistant, the real story behind the scandal. It was a hit piece, accusing me of manipulating Ethan, of using him for my own gain. Ethan read it over my shoulder, his face pale. This is my fault, he said, his voice breaking. I dragged you into this. No, I said, turning to face him. We're in this together. Always. He nodded, but the doubt was back in his eyes. We left the bar, slipping out the back to avoid the paparazzi that had started trailing us again. At home, we curled up together, the weight of the world pressing down. I love you, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. I should have said it sooner. My heart stopped, then surged. I love you too, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And we're going to get through this. The next morning, we woke to a surprising open letter from the Shades of Us cast and crew, defending Ethan and calling out Victor's lies. It was signed by Lena, the cinematographer, even the craft services team. We stand with Ethan Caldwell. It read, his truth is our truth. Ethan read it, tears streaming down his face. They're fighting for me, he said, his voice shaking. For us. I pulled him close, my own eyes wet. Because you're worth it, I said. Because we're worth it. As we held each other, the city humming outside, I knew the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, I felt like we could win. The open letter was a turning point, a crack of light in the storm. Ethan's fans amplified it, sharing it across social media until it drowned out Victor's lies. But the industry was still a battlefield, and we were far from safe. Rachel, our lawyer, worked fast, filing a defamation suit against Victor and the outlet that published the hit piece. She warned us it could take months, but the public response was immediate. Ethan's story resonated, not just with fans, but with others who'd felt forced to hide their truths. Letters poured in, from teens in small towns to actors who'd stayed silent too long. Ethan read every one, his eyes bright with a mix of pride and pain. One morning, as we sat in his apartment, he turned to me, a letter in his hand. This kid, he said, his voice thick. He says I gave him the courage to come out to his parents. Lucas, that's everything. I smiled, my heart swelling. You're changing lives, Ethan. Not just yours. He pulled me close, his lips brushing my forehead. Ours. He corrected. You're part of this. The defamation suit gained traction, with evidence piling up against Victor. Emails surfaced showing he'd manipulated crew members, bribing them for false statements. Lena's documentary crew caught wind of it, weaving the scandal into their project, turning Ethan's fight into a symbol of resilience. But the pressure didn't let up. Ethan's parents called again, this time softer, asking to meet. We drove to Pasadena, my hand in his as we faced them. Ellen cried, apologizing for her fear. Tom was quieter, but he hugged Ethan, a gesture that said more than words. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Shades of Us premiered at a small festival, and the response was electric. Critics called Ethan's performance transformative, and the film won an audience award. Ethan stood on stage, his hand in mine, and spoke about love, truth, and the courage to be seen. The crowd roared, and I felt like my heart might burst. Victor's campaign crumbled. The outlet retracted the hit piece, and he was dropped from the studio project. Ethan's career wasn't what it had been, but it was better, smaller, truer. He signed on for Lena's documentary and another indie film, projects that let him breathe. One night, we stood on his balcony, the city glittering below. Ethan wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. I thought I'd lose everything, he said, but I found you. I turned, kissing him softly. We found each other, I said, and we're writing our own script now. The road hadn't been easy, and it wouldn't be. But as we stood there, hearts entwined, I knew we'd face whatever came next together. Hollywood could keep its rules. Our love was the story that mattered, and it was only just beginning.